Hey guys, it's Lee. So here we are with what's left of the fall garden. A couple things are still going well. The collards are still growing great, and we're still getting a lot of greens off of the broccoli and the uh, cauliflower. We harvested all the broccoli, harvested most of the cauliflower heads. It kind of strikes me as funny how the cauliflower all came in at different times. I think there's 18 out there, and we've harvested 5 heads, and some of them haven't even formed yet. Some of them are still small. But anyway, we survived 2 frosts, as you know. The I was here to cover them for the first frost, and I was out of town when the second frost came, and I didn't get a chance to cover anything. So the squash, the beans, tomato, they're cooked, they're done. So what I'm left with today is, as far as the cabbages go, we have 6 cabbage heads that are getting overripe. They're very firm, and they're actually starting to loosen up. So I think they're about to bolt. I'm going to go ahead and harvest those today, and we're going to make some sauerkraut. Trying not to squish these onions we put in a few weeks ago. They're doing okay. Frost didn't bother them. So nothing fancy or special about harvesting cabbages. Some people use a knife. Curved knife seems to work well for some people. I literally just grab the stalk of the plant and then twist the head, rock it back and forth. There you go. There's a harvested cabbage head. You notice it flips one way easier than the other. Well, that's the way it's going to break. There's that Savoy cabbage. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that really beautiful? I can't really tell the difference in the taste, but it's just such a pretty nice texture. Here's one of our cauliflower heads that are really ready for harvest. Starting to loosen up. I see some leaves coming through. I see some daylight poking through a couple of them. But like I was saying, it's funny. We've harvested 6 of the heads of cauliflower. This one's ready to harvest, but we harvested the others 3 days ago, and there's several plants in here that have no head forming yet. So that's kind of a mystery to me. Now, these red cabbages, like I was saying, they're not really forming heads. This has a tiny little head, but it's really loose. And we need to get ready for our fall garden. So I'm just going to go ahead and harvest what I can off of this. I'm going to take that small head right there, and then I'm going to harvest some of these really pretty healthy looking leaves that have grown after the frost, so they're not frost burnt. You can see this one's frost burnt and a little insect chewed. So we got a couple nice leaves left on there. That leaf's a little tattered. And then pretty much the top of this one is good. Again, there's no real head to it. But what that'll do is that'll add a little bit of color to our sauerkraut. Yeah, see, that's a little frost burnt, so we don't want that. That's a little bit frost burn on there. So here we have, I think this is probably, I'd say that's 15 pounds maybe. Let's go make some sauerkraut. All right, so here we are. So I was a little bit off on the weight estimation. I weighed it on the bathroom scale. This is 23.8 pounds of cabbage, and that is a lot of cabbage. Again, we have some green, a little bit of red, and some Savoy cabbage. These little red cabbages didn't amount to much more than a big red Brussels sprout. So that won't add much mass to our sauerkraut, but it will give some color, which is kind of cool. First, let's dispense with any rumor that I'm a sauerkraut or fermenting expert. I have never done this, and therefore, I consulted my good friend Aaron Watkins of Dade City, Florida. He is my go-to guru for all things country that I'm not familiar with. He gave me the rundown in like 3 minutes on the phone, told me how simple it is, gave me the basic premise, went on YouTube, looked up a couple recipes. So that's what we're going to do. I did find a recipe that sounds great to me. It's a cinnamon raisin sauerkraut. It has a little bit of brown sugar in it, which I think is going to be just amazing as a side for a pork roast. I ordered some very simple supplies off of Amazon. It's very affordable too. This fermenting jar that has a lid to keep bacteria from getting in, but also has a valve that allows gas to escape, which is important for the fermenting process. A cabbage masher. I didn't need this. I could have used a hammer handle or a stick. And then some glass weights. The glass weights are necessary to keep the cabbage below the level of the juice. My wife also has this beautiful crock. This beautiful crock she inherited from her grandmother. It was a sourdough starter crock, but it'll work perfectly for fermenting sauerkraut. We just won't be able to seal the bale here on top because the gas has to escape. So that's it. I'm pretty excited. Never made cabbage. Never made sauerkraut. Sounds really cool. And if you've never made sauerkraut, we're going to be learning together. And we're going to get started with the preparation process. One of the best suggestions that I got about making sauerkraut was that water the cabbage really well the night before you harvest it, because the juices inside the cabbage is what makes your brine that makes the sauerkraut. So I didn't hear that suggestion in time. So the second best idea, which serves two purposes, is to soak it for several hours submerged in water. So that helps the cabbage to pull up more fluid so that it can create more brine. And also the submersion in water for several hours helps any bugs or anything that's hiding down inside the leaves to get out and inspires them to swim out. So we're just now taking off some of the outer leaves that might have an insect chew, maybe a chew hole on it, little tattered edges. We want to take that off because we only want nice, healthy, pretty green leaves left on the head to make our sauerkraut. We didn't have any bugs floating in the water, so I guess we were good on that end. A little dirt, but no insects or insect dander. And again, we have everything is really well sanitized. Both of our containers, the whole work area, my hands, all of our cutting implements, really well sanitized. The sinks were sanitized before I started. Cutting boards, everything. And we might save a couple of these much nicer looking leaves, because while we have some glass weights, we might not have enough to hold the chopped cabbage under the level of brine. And I heard one great suggestion was to use some of the leaves that you take off as a filler. To take up the space between the lid and your cabbage in the brine, which would push the cabbage down into the brine and keep it from being exposed to the air inside the jar. Next, we'll be taking the core out of each cabbage. Again, that's also something that you can save. I like to use a couple different knives for projects like this. One big knife for making your big cuts, and then maybe something a little bit smaller for your finer work. Good suggestion that I saw on removing the core is to make a couple downward V-shaped cuts. That takes your core out. So a good suggestion to save that is also as something to take up room in the brine. So we're making our sauerkraut in 1 gallon containers. It's 5 pounds of cabbage to make a gallon of sauerkraut. We're going to try to get rid of as much of this water as possible. So we need to measure out 5 pounds of cabbage. Again, we'll try to get most of the water out because water is heavy. So we're at 2 pounds now. We're going to stack them in here like Jenga. That's 4.13. Are we going to get another one on top of there? Well, that's 6 pounds. Take one that's much smaller. That's 5.06 pounds. We're going to call that good. Now, for the salt proportions, I got some all-natural sea salt here. They say pretty much any kind of salt is fine as long as you don't use iodized salt. So the salt ratio for the sauerkraut is 2.5% of the volume of the 2.5% of the weight of the cabbage. So if you have 5 pounds of cabbage, you need 2.5% of the weight of 5 pounds. And 2.5% in ounces is 2 ounces. So 5 times 16 ounces in a pound. So we're just going to keep going. So that's what 5 pounds of shredded cabbage looks like. You can see the differences in the plain cabbage, the Savoy cabbage, and the red cabbage. I think that's going to be a nice mix. I wish I had a bigger bowl. That would be a critique that I would add. And that would be helpful to have a bowl twice this big. So I'm going to start blending the salt with it. I'm going to start putting it in this bowl small amounts at a time and then adding our salt into it, our 2 ounces of salt. So here we'll go with that. I would say you should kind of scrunch it and beat it up as you're trying to macerate and break the cabbage so it absorbs salt. And you'll see right away the juice starts coming out of the cabbage. And we'll start shredding up this cabbage with the mandolin. And I have it set on super fine setting because that's what I like. I like the cabbage to be very fine. I mean, yeah, the sauerkraut. I'll save all these leaves and do them individually with a knife later. Be careful if you're not using the hand piece. When it gets too short, I will definitely use it. So that's making a really nice fine shred for me. Getting pretty close now. I'll start using this. Okay, so sterilized jar, sterilized masher, re-sterilized hands. We'll start adding the cabbage salt mixture into our 1 gallon jar. Okay, so we have our sterilized glass weights. We're going to use 2 for this batch and 2 for the next batch. Everything here is sterilized. Doesn't look like it because there's cabbage everywhere, but if you notice, the cabbage has already formed a brine that's all the way to the top, and I assume it's just going to keep going, and they'll eventually, probably within a few hours, be more brine than there is sauerkraut. So, cabbage. So we're going to put a couple leaves in there because we don't want any of that sauerkraut getting exposed to the air. So what we'll do is we'll put a couple leaves in there that when it's all finished, we can throw those away because they don't matter. And we'll put a weight on that one. Put a weight on this one. Oh, looks like we're only going to need to use 1. That's very effective. Just take your very sterile fingers. Make sure you get all the bits off the side of the jar, because they've got to be under that brine, or they'll just cause problems. They won't ferment. They'll just be gross and dried out and icky. Yeah, look at that nice brine. Now, some of these little leaf tips that I just put in there, they might be exposed to the air. They'll be yucky and not worth eating, but they will just be discarded. So it's just another layer to keep the cabbage from getting exposed to any air that's in the jar. Okay, so I was telling you about the very affordable fermenting jar that I bought off of Amazon. This was $12, and they call it a fermenting kit because it has this little valve, and it's a 2-part valve. So this is vented, and then this has a little bubbler. I'm not sure what it's called, but what this does is make sure that no bacteria, once you seal it, no bacteria can get in the jar, because we're going to fill this up with water. See, that little outside part gets filled with water, and then this cap goes over it. So the cap is lower than the water, so bacteria may be able to get in here, but it can't get under the water. Then we put that cap, see it's got little holes on it. And then this goes, we put the cap on, screw the cap on nice and snug. It does have a seal. And then this doesn't go in there firmly because it'll actually poke through. I think that affordable, when things are really affordable, that means more than just easy to pay for. It might mean that it's not the best in the world. So if you push too hard on this, the whole thing pops down inside. So it's nice and snug. It's not coming out of there. Again, I sterilized everything before we started. So all we have to do is wipe off the outside of our jar and put it in a dark, or at least not brightly lit, area where the temperature fluctuations aren't too extreme for 45 to 60 days. That's the first batch. So on the last go around, 5 pounds of cabbage only filled this about halfway up. I had to do a whole nother head of cabbage, and you can see that's not, it's only 3/4 full. So with this go around and my wife's awesome stone crock that she inherited from her grandmother, I'm going to do the Apple Raisin Sauerkraut. So for this go around, we're going to do 7 pounds of cabbage. And for 7 pounds of cabbage, we need 2.8 ounces of sea salt. So that's what we got. That's our ingredients. So this is the batch that I'm the most excited about. This is going to be my Apple Raisin Sauerkraut. I got 1.5 cups of raisins here, 3 tablespoons of light brown sugar, and I'll do a pinch of caraway seeds. And these are new apples, Snapdragon apples. They're delicious. I don't know how well they'll hold up to the fermenting process, but the worst thing that could happen is they'll turn into apple juice while applesauce while they're in there, and I guess that wouldn't be so terrible. Okay, so we have our salted cabbage that's making brine. We have our apples, raisins, brown sugar, and actually I made, there's more space in this one, so we'll be able to use 2 weights. I took a couple of the cores and I cut them flat, so we'll be able to set one on either side of the cabbage and put a weight on each. Again, totally sterilizing everything along the way, both by hand washing, using Lysol on the utensils, because the last thing I want to do is put any bacteria in here that could mess anything up. A lot of the videos and such that I've seen make me think that it might not be too big a deal, but I would rather avoid it. Yeah, evidently if you do not the greatest job of preparation and some bacteria gets in there, it just makes like a slimy coating on the inside of the vessel or on top of the brine, and that you can easily scrape off, and it doesn't affect the edibility or the quality of your sauerkraut. Put some apples. Yeah, we're definitely going to make applesauce. You know what? I think I'll combine them in here so we don't end up with a bunch of layers. That's what I'll do. That's probably more than enough. They give a lot of flavor. That was the caraway seeds. So this is 7 pounds of sauerkraut and 2.8 ounces of salt. They're already making tons of brine. This has been an enjoyable experience. Now we just gotta have patience to wait for the finished product. I don't know if it'll all fit. I have to put some in the other jar. All right, so I think we have a good level. So the last thing I'm going to do is take this rubber spatula. I'm going to make sure that there's no bits on the edge of this jar. I want all the cabbage down in the brine. So we have plenty of brine. And then I'm going to take a piece of a leaf just like I did before. We're going to tuck that, get that down so all of the sauerkraut is under the brine. I'll even take this and poke the edges down. Make a little slit so the gases can come through, because as it ferments, there's going to be tiny bubbles that come up from the bottom. That looks good. And then, like I said, we took our couple cores and made some flat. That'll be perfect. Then we have our, oh, we don't have room for both. Don't have room for both. We do have room for 2 weights though. And that's going to keep everything under the brine. Now we don't, with this crock, I love this crock by the way. We don't have the luxury of the valve that's going to burp, that's going to allow the gases to burp out on their own. So we are just going to keep this on here like this. We're not going to, see, normally if you were just storing something, you would lock it down like that. But this has a rubber seal on it. And so my understanding is if the pressure built up too much, it could explode. That sounds a little far-fetched, but so what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep it locked just like this to get it over to the pantry. Then I'm going to take this loose so that the gases can bleed themselves off as they need to. All right, so that's it. This is our cabbage and brine turned into sauerkraut. I'm going to put that in this accessory, this kitchen pantry that we have. We have a walk-in pantry. But I want to put it somewhere where it's not so out of sight, out of mind. Never made anything with ferment, and I don't want it bubbling over. So I'm just going to open that bail so that the gases can escape how they need to. And so I'm excited about that. I know that Apple Raisin Sauerkraut has a certain pork roast with its name on it. And we'll post an update when it's finished. I had heard that the longer you let it ferment, the more sour that it is. So I'll probably check it after 30 days, see if it's I like it, because I don't like it so bitingly sour, that it burns your tongue. Maybe 45 days. I've heard it can take 45 to 60 days, but I don't know. I don't want it too sour, so I'll be checking along the way, and I will post an update. Hey, thanks a lot for following along. Thanks for watching.